Hello, everyone. It's again another dinner table conversations. I feel like I just call it dinner table conversations, but for the most part, I just end up breakfast. I'm making breakfast right now, so it's more like in the kitchen. But I did want to kind of bring up a conversation around the topic of opportunities and just being single. So I'm making pancakes if you can't see already. So I kind of have these one of these like realizations because I feel like we, especially as women, I know this for sure, is we have this idea of being single is something that's like something to be ashamed of. And I had this conversation with someone, I'm not going to say her name because she's actually a very good friend of mine, but I remember her, we were talking about relationships when we were both studying in Paris a while ago, and I've since then reconnected with her. Like we're still friends. And I remember her telling me, and telling me and another friend while we were in Paris that, it's like, I really just want a boyfriend. Like I'm still a virgin. And I'm like, you know what? Being a virgin is fantastic because you don't have any type of memory or impurities, which I think is a good thing. I think it's not bad if you are a virgin, and I think that society kind of perverts that. But like for me, I feel like even if you're not a virgin, you're still virtuous, and it really just depends on you as your character, less so as your sexual status. So particularly, like, one of the things I notice is that, when people try to give up their virginity because they want someone to like them, and there's like no guarantee that this person is going to even still be around. It's like, I think I'm in love with this person and this is what he wants from me. First of all, that's a red flag. I just feel like that's just not ethical. To ask of any woman. I need an egg for this. That's not an ethical thing to ask of anyone. And when I think about that, especially in a spiritual sense, and for those of you who are not Christians, like my job is not to convert or to press Christianity upon anyone. My goal is just to I use spirituality as a way to explain where my viewpoint is. So it's never to kind of convince anyone of what it's just to justify my own thinking. I'll go this way. So when we look at that kind of aspect, is that especially if you feel like giving something up like that is something you don't want to do, then why do we feel pressure to do that? Especially like in my faith, having sex outside of marriage is very much frowned upon. It's not something that you should be doing. I will just say that there are a lot of people in the Christian community who do that, and they don't really think twice about it. So it's kind of like very hypocritical, and I really don't like it because it also makes people feel like who aren't virgins to feel like, oh, well, I'm impure already, so I might as well just continue what I'm doing because I'm already impure. And that's not true. I was thinking about the adulterous woman, which is one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible because it's basically where this woman is caught in the act of adultery, and they're like, we're going to stone her. And they come to Jesus with her. And it's like, what should we do with her? And then I said, okay, well, whoever is without sin may throw the first stone. And everyone ready to just stone her and to judge, cast judgment. It was like they all dropped their stones and left because they're like, yeah, you've got your own problems. You've got your own issues, to take up. And he tells her, go and sin no more. It's forgiveness. And I feel like, when we think that especially for me, it's like, I am not a virgin, and I feel like, I've kind of have come to a redemptive state, and I'm like, I really kind of want to, this is not what I want for myself, this is not what God wants, this is not what not regardless of the spirituality components of it. For me, I just don't believe in that. And I feel like part of it was just falling into peer pressure, because when I got to college, it was like, oh, like, I hooked up with this guy, and it's like, oh, good for you. And it's like, why are we, celebrating that somebody has basically slept with someone? I just feel like, I just don't understand that, It's like, oh, okay. My response is usually, oh, okay. Why are you sharing that with me? But I just feel like, we're celebrating these things that I feel like I said, if this is you, if this is like my level of thinking, you don't have to agree with me at all. This channel is just my thoughts more than anything else. I just don't really feel like it's something we should celebrate in a way. It's like, oh, great for you. Like, it's a reward thing. Like, it's a peer value, validation, where it's like, yeah, I'm cool because I've had sex. And that's not what I feel like it's for. So, I don't know. I just feel like, when it comes to like pleasing man, like humans, is that, it's like, well, if I'm not comfortable with this, but it's like, you need to have sex with me because that's what I want, and that's what I want out of this relationship. And if that's not what you want out of that relationship, it's like you have a lot of women who may have regrets because they're like, I really like this guy and this is what he wants, but that's not what I want. And you're not married, especially. So that's already a red flag right there. Yeah. So I'm trying to find my pen. That's a red flag right there. So, yeah. And then, on the other hand, I think about the fact that, especially as single women, there are a lot of times people who feel like, well, if I'm not having sex with anyone, then like I'm going to just be, single for the rest of my life. And honestly, singleness is a very wonderful thing. I will just say it's wonderful because when you're by yourself, you have time to kind of get to know yourself. When I was in college, I used to take myself on dates. Like, let's go to a museum, let's go for a walk. Like, hey, let's go. I used to take myself to movies on like a Tuesday, like matinee, because it was like $8. And then because everyone's at work, there was like nobody in the theater, and I just would laugh out loud, like certain things, or like I could react, and there's no lines at movie theaters. I used to take myself out on dates because I'm like anytime I broke up with someone, I would always take myself out to dinner or to lunch or something to celebrate. You did it. You made a decision, So that's like, I feel like in a nutshell, we need to kind of start embracing the aspect of being single, because it's not a bad thing, ladies. Same thing with men. I think with anyone, being single is a gift, because you have, like I said, you don't have any outside influences. Because part of the thing is that for me, when I decided to break up with my ex-boyfriend, as of recently this year, 2023, part of it was that sex was a component that was there. It's like, it's really difficult to wait until marriage, and that's not something I really want to do. It's like, I feel like over time that's going to affect my relationship in terms of like how I feel about you, because we're not doing that. And I'm like, well, first of all, after I started thinking about it, at the time I was like, oh, well, maybe. And we were also long distance, which actually prevented a lot of things, because I feel like things would be different. But it would be different if I was not, if we were in the same location. But we weren't. So it makes it a lot easier when you're not in the same proximity of one another. So that's kind of, why is this so dark? Yeah, so it's like when you're not in the same proximity, it makes it easier to think clearly. And I also had, I had family that was around, so I could get their input on these types of questions that I had, because my family is really the most important influence that I have, versus like if I was, I'm gonna turn this other way on. Versus if I was just living if I was living in LA and I had no other people, I didn't have my family or my parents that I was living with at the time, then I feel like I probably would have had more, he would have probably influenced me a lot more. Because he wasn't really going to church, even though he was a Christian, and he was a believer in all these different things. And the one thing that bothered me was that I was like, I'm really not really feeling this. I really don't like this idea. And he's like, yeah, but Jazz, God forgives. And I remember hearing someone telling this book that my pastor was talking about, and it was The Cost of Discipleship. And they're talking about, they had this whole chapter about cheap grace, where it's like, I'm going to just keep doing what I'm doing, but I'm going to just ask for forgiveness. It's like if your friend says, like if you cheat on your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend or something, and you're like, okay, I know I cheated on you, but you should forgive me. And it's like they forgive you. And it's like, oh yeah, I cheated on you again. I'm going to keep continuously cheating on you. But I just know that for a fact I can come back and ask for forgiveness. And I just don't feel like, I think even like spiritually, like I said, if you're not a believer, but spiritually, I feel like if you are in any type of relationship and you're constantly breaking that bond by doing something that basically breaks someone's trust every single time, and it's like, oh, God forgives. My friend is going to forgive me. So I'm just going to go over and I'm just going to ask for forgiveness. And that was kind of the issue that I had. And so when we're looking at people who are constantly, going against what you're trying to say or what you're telling them, which is right. It's like, for example, in this case, like faithfulness. If you're not faithful, how can I trust you? And I don't think that, we can forgive people, but we can't continue. And that was where I kind of got my point where I was with temptation. Like when he called me recently, I was like, Jazz, you got to say no. Like, I know that you have history and all this other stuff, but you need to say no. You can forgive him, but we got to move on, because again, forgiveness is there, but there are consequences to breaking trust continuously. So that was kind of where my point is. And like, if you don't really believe in like waiting until marriage and that's not your thing, like I said, that is up to you. That's not something for me to kind of make judgments on. And I feel like I was saying, is that when Christians are preaching about waiting until marriage, don't have sex and whatever, it's like you're basically being hypocrites, because a lot of people who are having sex out of marriage are people within the church. It's really ironic. It's really, really ironic. So, yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's funny. But anyways, but I was saying is that I feel like being single is a gift, and I kind of decided that I really wasn't in a position to start dating anyone, because I feel like in our day, in our culture, in our generation, is that hookup culture is very prevalent. Like the whole idea of, hey, let's live together so we can save money. But the thing is that when you do that, there's like, if somebody breaks up with the other person, and it's like, well, my name is on the lease because I'm not married to you, and you got to leave. That's like the one thing. And I remember taking a serious dating and engaged course, because I wanted to get some perspective on that relationship that I was currently in at the time. And it was like, well, I want to get this perspective that they were saying, even in the beginning, they're like, well, as couples, you may realize that through taking this class, you may not actually be together. Like they were talking about not making major purchases when you're not in a relationship with certain people, because when you do that, like I said, like having like a car together, well, if somebody breaks up with the other person, who owns that car? That's the thing, we don't really talk about it. So, the idea of living with someone that I'm not married to, is that you also don't really have those legal protections, if that makes sense. Let me move this around a little bit. I keep moving around, so I have to keep moving my camera around, So I just want to kind of keep that in mind, because I just feel like, so I feel like we don't talk about this enough, and especially when I think about sex ed in the church, because they really don't talk about, like I said, sex in depth, because it's like, don't do it, and it's like this like perverted thing where it's like we don't talk, it's like it's this impure thing, and it's like you do realize that God created man and woman to have sex in order to have for children to reproduce. That's like, there's no way for you to get around it. That's how children are made. And obviously for God to say that this is how we're going to reproduce, that was an idea that he had. And it's the way that it is, it's a very good thing, but it's kind of like one of those things like, it's like described as like a wildfire. You don't want like fire just going everywhere. It's like, you have like fire from this thing, from this stove, it's a stove. It's controlled. You don't want stuff going everywhere. Like fire just burning up everything. So it's like it's in a contained environment, so no one can get hurt. And sometimes I feel like because I am a person that can get easily attached to people, if you don't know, I am a Cancer. I love people. I love taking care of people. I love just being a motherly person, if that makes any sense. So for me, it's like I get easily attached to people, and having sex the whole purpose is to create a bond with someone. So when you have those types of, relationships or whatnot, and you end up doing things way too early, then it's like, well, you've established a connection with someone, and sometimes people can take advantage of that. And I saw that even in my last relationship. It's like, well, we've done this, so therefore, we are like, you're mine. Some people actually do think that. And I work for a judge, and so I've seen cases that come through in our criminal court where people have committed domestic violence crimes, like strangulation. We had one guy who strangled his wife, and we sentenced him to 8 years. And when I think about it, it's like, and she said even on the bench, she's like, this is a person you're supposed to love. And when you think about that as a single person, it's something I worry about all the time. I'm terrified of being in a relationship again, because part of it is that you never know how people are going to manipulate you. They might take advantage of you. And so you're really taking time to be with yourself so you can recognize those things, understanding what you're wanting out of a person and what you want out of yourself. So that way it's not just, oh, we're two halves and we complete each other, which doesn't make any sense. It's like two individual people who are basically becoming one flesh in accordance to Jesus Christ and God, So that's just like my perspective on it. I think that, obviously you can do whatever you want to do. If, like I said, these are my thoughts, this is my beliefs, and you don't have to take any of what I'm saying seriously. I'm just basically saying that, these are, like I said, these are things I feel like we don't talk about a lot, especially in the church and especially in our communities. And I kind of want to know, like, where does hookup culture come from? Especially like when we live, like, especially like sex is like something that's so taboo as a topic. And it's like when you do it, it's like something you talk about with your friends, but it's like, oh, my parents, I can't talk about it with them because they'll be like, whoa, well, why are you doing this? Or you shouldn't be doing that, So, but I think that one of the things I think we lack sometimes is building the relationship. Like, why are we jumping to bed when we could be getting to know who that person really is? And sometimes in having conversations and watching how they treat you as well as other people can really kind of give you a gauge of how they're going to treat them. Like, if they're a person who's really, you've noticed that they're constantly never doing what they say they're going to do, and they're constantly, like, you'll tell them what they want, what you want, and they just completely ignore it or make up some type of excuse. And that's basically what your sex is going to look like. It's just them basically getting what they want and then not actually adhering to you. It's kind of like the song, it takes two to make a thing go right. So when you think about it, it's a two-way street. And I think that when we think about singleness, like, oh my gosh, I'm single. I mean, one of the things I love about living by myself is that I wake up at 4 a.m. There's no one keeping me up from going to bed at my bedtime, which is like 8 o'clock. There's nobody to disturb me when I'm doing yoga. All the food in the refrigerator is mine. I don't have to feed anybody. I don't have any children. I can go travel with my friends whenever I want to. I don't have to worry about it because it's not something that, because I don't have those other people there influencing my decisions. So I think that that's something that, we really need to change our perspective on, is that being single is not a bad thing. Let's work on ourselves and know what we want so we can have healthier relationships. So I'm going to, wow, there's like smoke from that thing. So I'm going to eat my breakfast. But I really hope this is kind of like a really great conversation opener. And I really want to know in the comments, like, what you may feel like your kind of take on that particular topic. Like, what do you feel like? Do you feel like there's a lot of pressure to basically have sex out of wedlock? And basically, like, do you feel like there's not, there's not a connection very much? You're not making connections with people as much in that arena? Does it feel like you were pressured to be married or to be, whatever with other people? So I really want to know like what your perspective is on like singleness and basically like, you know, singleness and sex in relationships. So, all right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.